My name is Andrea Davis. I am the International Programme Manager at the Civil Service College. And today I am joined by our expert trainer, Matt Greenough, who will be delivering today's session on speeches in a crisis. What can we learn? The session will probably last around 1 hour, and it will be recorded, of course, and it will be put on our YouTube channel. So for those that cannot make it, if you've got any contacts, friends, anyone that you work with, please do let them know that we will be putting this video online. And I just want to welcome everybody today. We've got some of our alumni joining us, and for our newbies, welcome. Can I just go to the next slide, please? Fantastic. Okay, so who is the Civil Service College? This is our UK footprint. We are an independent training organisation that offers training solutions to the UK civil service and the wider public sector. We have delivered training to not just central government departments, such as the Cabinet Office, DEFRA and DWP, but also devolved administrations like the Welsh Government and, of course, our NHS, as well as other local authorities. Thank you. Okay, and not only do we work in the UK, we also work internationally. So you can see here, the various countries that we are in partnership with, who we've got clients with, and who we are in contact with. We've got very good footprint with, India and those across the Middle East and so on. So you can see here that we do work around the world. So for those who have joined us who are from other countries today, hello and welcome. And please do get in touch with us if you do have any training needs. Thank you. These are our course categories. So we do organise and deliver around 70 different types of courses, ranging from accountability and governance to leadership and management, professional development, policy, law and legal, media, digital and data, and finance and commercial. So today's session will be based on the leadership and management series. Please do get in touch at the end of the session. You can give me an email if you would like to find more about the full day course that Matt does deliver based on speech writing. So please do get in touch with us. Thank you. Our services, okay, so we deliver a range of different services, from open courses to tailored to international. So our open courses are available virtually. So we do have all of our courses online. We obviously deliver webinars each week on a Thursday, based on different issues and so on. But we also offer them face-to-face, of course, as well, of course. So we do have a training suite here at the college in London. But we can also, deliver it in your workplace, your working environment as well. We do offer tailored solutions, so we can tailor our training courses to your needs as well. So whatever your training needs are, please do get in touch. We can come to an agreement with you to put something together to meet your learning outcomes. And we offer, obviously, again, which I mentioned earlier, we offer our courses internationally, whether that is having delegates from abroad that come to the UK and study here in London, or we can actually fly our trainers out to your country as well. So please do speak to me at the end, or send me an email and we can discuss that further for those that are interested. Yeah. Okay, so where are we based? We are based right in the heart of Westminster. We are around about a 10-minute walk from Parliament, about 5-10 minute walk from the Supreme Court. We are based right on St James's Park, so that's roughly about 15 minutes from most of the tourist attractions like Buckingham Palace and so on. So please do come visit us when travel permits. We would love to see you. Thank you. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, today's session will be on speeches in a crisis. What can we learn? Today's 1 hour online workshop will look at what recent speeches can teach us about our own ability to craft up an unforgettable talk. So again, we are joined by Matt, who is a former speechwriter and Chief Special Advisor to the Welsh Government. He works with us, the Civil Service College, to deliver courses on speechwriting, executive presence and crisis communications. And he runs his own speechwriting and communications consultancy, Word Matter Limited. So without further ado, please, Matt, take it away. Thank you.
Well, morning, Andrea, and morning, everybody. Thanks for that introduction. It's a great pleasure to be joining you all this morning. It's quite a strange experience for me because our speechwriting course that we run at the college, when it's face-to-face, is very, very hands-on. In fact, I'd probably have you writing within the first 2 minutes if you've been in the room. But you're quite lucky this morning. You can relax. You get a free pass this morning. You can sit back with a coffee and hopefully enjoy a fairly pain-free canter through the essentials of speechwriting. The idea of this particular webinar came from a webinar we ran a couple of months back about crisis communications more generally, and about what we were seeing during the global pandemic, what was working, what wasn't working. And we wanted to really focus down today specifically on speechwriting. What's the importance of speeches at a moment of crisis? What can speeches do? And what does that teach us as speechwriters or presenters, either at times of crisis or speeches at the best of times too? So why learn about speechwriting? Well, this picture you see on the right, you might recognise, I'm sure you'll all recognise one person in that picture. It's Michelle Obama, former First Lady, who gave a typically barnstorming speech, albeit virtually, the other evening at the Democrats' virtual convention. And the lady to her right is Sarah Hurwitz, who is her longtime speechwriter. Now, I saw Sarah give a really good talk about what it's like to work with one of the best speakers in the world, one of the most recognisable speakers in the world. And she gave this brilliant piece of advice that I always keep at the front of my mind before putting pen to paper. And she said, at the start of every speechwriting meeting, before a pen touched the paper, they would sit down and ask themselves, what is the one most important thing that we need to say today? What is the one truth that we need people to take away from this particular speech? And it's a really great starting point. It sounds simple, but one of the most common mistakes of speechwriting is trying to tell people absolutely everything you know about a particular subject. And this couldn't be more fundamental at a time of crisis. What is the one thing that you need somebody to take away? When you consider that, you know, many of these addresses that we'd be talking about are 15, 20, 30, even 40 minutes long, you still need the one thing, focus, right at the heart of the speech that people are going to take away from that. So why study speeching? Well, a good speech can change the world, bluntly. And I don't just mean that in the sense of big global events, starting wars, stopping wars, changing people's minds on huge issues of the day. What I mean by that is that when you're asked to give a speech or to write a speech for a presenter, in my mind, you've been given a wonderful opportunity, a really precious gift. In these busy, chaotic times, I would even say it's probably the most precious gift that anybody could give to you, and that is their time and their attention. And if you use that properly, even if it is just to impart one new idea, one new thing in people's minds, then you can, just in that one small way, make the world a different place just by using the power of words. It's a really great opportunity that people don't grasp solidly enough. Speechwriting is both an art and a science. It's a very British idea, I think, that it's somehow cheating to have a speechwriter, or even to prepare remarks, and that you should just turn up, speak from the heart or off the cuff. Boris Johnson does a tremendous act at pretending that's what he does. He doesn't. His speaking style and his speeches are very well practiced and very well honed. And the idea that they're off the cuff remarks are something that he's practiced over a long time. So you can, there's certainly people who can speak very well off the cuff, but it's a great risk, and it's an even bigger risk at times of crisis when you go back to that idea of taking just one thing away from a key speech. And it also says, if you don't prepare properly and use the science element of speech writing to make things memorable and impactful, that you don't really respect the audience that you're speaking to as well. The sign that you've prepared and that you've really thought about who you're giving the speech to is a sign of respect, and that's a good starting point for any dialogue. And finally, it'll improve everything you write, the study of speech writing, by thinking about how we speak and how we write, and I mean really thinking about it and practicing it as we would do in the full day course. Then you get to really understand language, its use, its impact, and it really will improve any persuasive text that you have to write, not just speeches. So it's always a good idea to start with somebody else's mistakes to show what can go wrong. So that's what we'll do now, and show the value of having a good speechwriter and a good speech. So if we could just move on to the next slide, that would be great. So this is Senator Sasse of Nebraska. He was asked to record a commencement speech for his old high school in Nebraska a couple of weeks back. Now, the students have just got through the weirdest time of their lives, it's fair to say, like our students here in the UK. They were looking for some words of wisdom from their senator, and this is what they got. Hopefully you can see and hear the video okay. I don't know about you, but I can only see the video. So just see if we can get that resolved for you.
You're going to see this on social media. Senator Ben Sasse's graduation speech for the Fremont High School class of 2020 has been getting some criticism, not only from the public, but elected officials. Here's some of what he said.
You're going to say stuff at your high school reunion service ceremonies. Remember that time that China started a big global pandemic that created the worst public health crisis in over a century and brought the economy to its knees, and we had to stay at home and everybody was hoarding toilet paper, and we all watched this documentary about some weirdo dude who raised tigers?
Sasse was referring to the Netflix show Tiger King. He also told graduates we're going to have a serious reckoning with the thugs in China who let this mess spiral out of control by lying about it. Here's how some are reacting. Senator Adam Morfeld tweeted, "Can't say that I have ever watched a high school commencement address where someone suggests that they are overweight, blames China for ruining their ceremony, and insults psychology majors." And Democratic Party Chair Jane Cleave tweeted, "Graduating high school is a memory our kids and families cherish," and Ben Sasse decided to use the moment to practice, quote, jokes. We reached out to Sasse's office, and his spokesperson responded with a statement that says, in part, like he said in the video greeting, Ben's proud of each of the graduates, and he believes their generation is tough enough to help lead us through the bumpy economic times ahead. The spokesperson also says it's ridiculous politically motivated people are complaining about Ben calling out China in a joke, and that pretending graduates are too fragile to hear the truth is silly.
Okay, well, I'll leave you decide who you think is the particularly silly one in that example. I
have seen this on social media.
Oh, there we go. So this is what happens with a speech where you don't think about your audience, the context of your speech, the content of your speech, or really just about anything at all. Senator Sasse is sat down, quite possibly with a speechwriter, but they've crafted a speech for themselves and not for the audience. And a moment in a crisis, that is really pretty unforgivable. So by failing to take their assignment seriously, they got something very wrong and ended up with headlines like this. When you've got the idea that you can narrow down to 6 of the most demoralizing moments from just a 10-minute speech, then you know that you've probably definitely missed the mark. And it certainly suggests to me that the answer to the question, is there room for humour in speeches during a crisis, is probably a big fat no. But if you're going to try it, then make sure it's funny and not offensive. Okay, so we'll move on from Senator Sasse's mistakes and have a think about some better examples. So if I say you think about some of the greatest speakers of all time, some of the greatest speeches of all time, the chances are that you're immediately going to think about leaders showing resolve at times of crisis. Speeches are a fundamental part of response to a big crisis. They can even define a crisis, and they can also define a nation's recovery or an organization's recovery from that crisis. So if you took a moment to have a think, we prejudged one of them there, but if you have a moment to have a think about who comes to mind for you, who are the great speakers of all time, what are the great speeches of all time, then 99 times out of 100 will all come up with the same list of people. And number one on the list, Winston Churchill, perhaps the greatest of them all. We will fight them on the beaches, we'll fight them on the landing grounds, we'll fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender. You know, the words that echo around everybody's imagination when they think about the Second World War. His rhetoric was equal to the moment of the country's darkest hour. And, you know, you can quote half a dozen of the speeches, even if you've never studied speech writing before. They've become part of the lexicon in terms of crisis and rhetoric. Another example, Elizabeth I, to her troops at Tilbury, preparing for the arrival of the Spanish Armada. Now, bearing in mind this is over 400 years ago, she said, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too, and think foul scorn that Parma or Spain or any prince of Europe should dare invade the borders of my realm." Another speech that has lasted the test of time and a moment of great crisis. And FDR, Roosevelt, on becoming president in the middle of the Great Depression, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." And next, Martin Luther King Jr., the "I Have a Dream" speech, possibly the most iconic speech of modern time. And it's certainly one that we use in detail during the speechwriting course at the college to look at the different techniques that are embedded within that and what we can learn from that. Next, George W. Bush Jr., not often famed for his rhetorical skills, but this particular moment, standing here with the rescue workers in the rubble of 9/11, he certainly did rise to the occasion and gave a short address on that bullhorn, which rallied the nation in a way that notably he did not do after Hurricane Katrina. And those two examples are often drawn about where the Bush presidency went right and where it went wrong, certainly in terms of rhetoric. And finally, Jacinda Ardern, somebody we've heard a lot about during the global pandemic and her leadership in New Zealand. But this is an address that she gave after the Christchurch mass shooting, where she said, "Let us be the nation that we believe ourselves to be." All the great speakers at moments of crisis that defined the crisis immediately, and looking back to those moments of crisis, are these words as much as what happened that we remember. So, what are leaders trying to do in a crisis? What do we need to convey as speechwriters and presenters? Now, I always like a mnemonic. It makes me think about words, and hopefully it makes things memorable for you, the audience, as well. And making things memorable is the point this morning. So let's spell out that word crisis. First, credibility. Why are people listening to you? Why should they listen to you? You need to establish right at the top of any speech, and not just at the top of the speech, but with also the people and the things that you surround yourself with as well. You can use the trappings of your office if you're a leader, but why you are the authority on this matter and why people need to listen to you. Okay, and next, R for reassurance. Okay, people will be in a state of alarm or panic throughout the crisis, and you need to offer reassurance even if you don't have all the answers at that moment in time. Next, information. Offer up everything you can. If information is seen to be held back and something comes out further down the line that people think is important, and it feels like you've held that information back, you'll start to look evasive. You'll start to seem like you're part of the problem. But also to keep it as simple as you can. Remember, the speech is difficult to remember much in an address of more than 10-15 minutes long. So keep it simple and offer detailed briefings to those people who know it. So again, it doesn't look like you're hiding any information, but keep the information that you contain within the speech as simple as you possibly can and as understandable as you can. Okay, next, sympathy. You need to show a human side, even if you're asserting control as a leader. And a glib reference that we've seen far too many of in the press conferences through the pandemic to thoughts and prayers really doesn't cut it at all. You need to think about the words that you would want to hear as a writer or a speaker if this situation was impacting you the worst. And if you think about that, you normally get your tone about right. Okay, inspiration. Even in the moments of confusion and darkness, people need to be offered hope, a reason to carry on. And if you look back to the speeches that we just had a quick flick through there, that's a common denominator in all of them, as leaders offering hope at the darkest time. And how do you do that? Solutions. You offer solutions. At an early stage in a crisis, it can be difficult to get into detail, but you do need to map out clearly what you're doing and why, and how you're going to keep people updated about your approach. don't hide your thinking, but don't box yourself in either. Again, in some of the desperate scrabble to show that they're on top of the pandemic, government said that they would do this and that, particularly around testing, that they couldn't then live up to. So don't box yourself in, but map out what you are trying to do in as much detail as you can. Okay, so we've seen a very bad example in terms of content. Here is a good example of one of the best speeches, certainly I've seen during the pandemic, from the Queen. This was on April the 5th, and we'll just have a look at how she closed her speech, which I think will tell us a lot of lessons. We'll have a quick look at how that goes, and then see what you noticed during the closing section.
Know deep down that it is the right thing to do. While we have faced challenges before, this one is different. This time we join with all nations across the globe in a common endeavour, using the great advances of science and our instinctive compassion to heal. We will succeed, and that success will belong to every one of us. We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again. But for now, I send my thanks and warmest good wishes to you all.
Okay, and so that is a really good example of how you do it. The Queen is not a decision maker in the UK. The monarch is not a decision maker. She's not there to fulfil the kind of the CEO role of telling the public what they need to do, but she is there as, you know, the comforter in chief, and that's certainly why she made that speech at that time, to sympathise and to persuade people that they're doing the right thing, for all the right reasons. And the very simple but evocative language that was used in that speech just fit the moment perfectly, and signed off using a number of techniques that we'll discuss briefly towards the end of the session. We will be with our friends again, we'll be with our families again, we will meet again. So rule of 3 to finish off is very powerful, and that evocative use of we will meet again to recall the wartime years, but in a subtle way, not forcing it down people's throats. So as a really good example of a really well-crafted speech, and as you'll see, 4 minutes long, that often is all it takes. So that was a good example of a speech in a crisis doing exactly what it needed to do. Let's have a look at a bad example on the flip side. So you'll all have seen the coverage about the terrible explosion in Beirut, and this is what the Prime Minister said immediately after, on the day of the explosion. He said, Lebanon is going through an ordeal that could only be faced with national unity and solidarity among all Lebanese from all backgrounds and regions. We're going through a disaster that could only be overcome with determination and tenacity to face this serious challenge and its destructive consequences. So far, so good, I would say. You know, a call for unity, a recognition of the scale of the disaster, and a determination to meet the challenge ahead. But then he went on to say this. If we just move on to the next slide. What happened today will not fly by without accountability. All those responsible for this catastrophe will pay the price. He started to look for somebody to blame. Now, this is not George W. Bush stood in the rubble of 9/11. It's not a terrorist attack. This is not an act of war. This is a disaster which is homemade and which resulted from administrative incompetence. So the Prime Minister and the President might have got the headlines that they wanted overnight. This is the FT story here, which runs with a promise to punish the negligent. But within hours, the troubled backstory came out. It was clear that the buck stopped with the government and people were on the streets. And it was clear that the first words out of the Prime Minister's mouth should have been sorry and not a desire to blame others. And from that moment on, striking the wrong tone right out of the blocks, the government was doomed. And that is the importance of making the right speech at the right time and not looking to ignore or hide the crucial information that you know is going to come out in the early days of the crisis. So, good example, bad example. So what do we do as speechwriters before we write? Now, as I mentioned right at the start, the course that we run at the college is a very practical one. So we do look at examples, as we've done already, from history and around the world, but only so that they can inform our work. And so we do a lot of work before we've even put pen to paper about thinking about what we need to do as writers. And when delegates ask me what makes me the most nervous about writing a speech, I always say white space, blank pages. And that's why I think the work that goes on before we sit down to draft it is so important. And I'll run through a few things to think about. My work is not as chaotic as the little animation that we've got going on there, but it's not far off. One tip that I always give to people, I think it's absolutely fundamental, is write down pretty much anything and everything interesting you ever see or hear. If you find it interesting, somebody else will too. And if you've got a long speech to fill, if you've got jokes, anecdotes, quotes, little excerpts of speeches ready to hand, then you're never ever going to have a blank page, because you're always going to have some ready-made text stored away on a file, sat on a post-it note somewhere. And regardless of the situation, you'll always start to build up a bank of information, quotes, jokes, files that you can fit into any occasion. So make a note of everything as you go along that you find interesting. If you find it interesting, other people will too. So before we write, what do we need to think about? Okay, expectations. Now this applies to speech writing at all times, but it couldn't be any more important at times of a crisis. You know, you're not writing a speech to be delivered in a context-free world. You know, your principal hopefully won't be speaking into a void. When we get back to normal times, hopefully we'll be speaking into occasions for the next picture, a bit like that. So the reasons all the speeches that we looked at earlier worked is because that they met expectations or even surpassed expectations. You know, people wanted to hear defiance from Churchill, and they got it in spades. Troops wanted to be inspired by Elizabeth I, and they were. And New Zealand wanted to regain a sense of itself after the Christchurch massacre, and that's what the Prime Minister gave them. And those rescue workers working in New York were angry, and they wanted justice, and they wanted to hear some fire from their president. So it is not a low bar to meet people's expectations. And if you don't frame your contribution in a way that makes sense to the context around you, it'll fall flat. And that is true of a big hall meeting like that. And it's also true of, if we look at the next picture, unfortunately, a lot of our speeches that we're giving at the moment tend to look a bit more like that rather than those wonderful full halls. But it's true there as well. You need to think about the context that you're writing in. And if you need any reminding about that, compare the example of the speech that we heard from the Queen earlier with the remarks after the death of Diana. Now, those remarks people considered to be tone deaf to the scale of public mourning and the sadness that had taken over the majority of the country. And it did a great deal of damage to the monarchy for many years to come, because the context of the situation was not reflected in the tone and the content of the remarks that came after. Okay, so we thought about our audience and what people are expecting from us. We thought about the content we need to get in there, about the credibility, the reassurance, the information, the inspiration. How do we make it memorable? So even if you're doing this on Zoom or recording a video, you need people to take away certain messages. And there are certain tricks of the trade that are employed by leaders from all political perspectives, business leaders and experienced communicators from every walk of life. The more experienced communicators you'll see doing it without even knowing they're doing it almost. But for us as writers, we need to think very carefully about what techniques we use, and we'll run through a few of them quickly. A key one is remember it's a performance. That's why we've got Mel up there. Use short lyrical sentences. If the Queen can use song lyrics, then so can you, frankly. Use repetition and rhetorical questions. Use the rule of three, which we'll touch on in a bit more detail towards the end, and use metaphor as well. Now, the use of metaphors and similes are really powerful ways for a speaker to influence an audience. Metaphor can change the way we understand an issue or a problem. It can change how we experience reality. It can change the way we behave. And using the right metaphor in a speech can not just make it memorable, it give a whole new understanding to an audience. But that goes to show that why they have to be used very, very carefully. I can give you a great example. It's from Bill Clinton's first inaugural address as president. sorry, the Rogues Gallery underneath are getting a quick preview. But if Clinton's inaugural address, he said, "You have changed the face of Congress, the presidency, and the political process itself. Yes, you, my fellow Americans, have forced this spring. Now you must do the work that the season demands." So the idea of spring immediately makes you think of renewal and, of course, hope. And Bill Clinton was famously the man from hope. So spring worked perfectly for that particular occasion. Now, war, what is it good for? Apologies to Bruce Springsteen. His answer to the question was absolutely nothing. That is not the case for leaders around the world who have used war as how they framed their response to the coronavirus outbreak. It has been the go-to metaphor for leaders around the world, again, of all different political persuasions. So first up, we have Donald Trump, who described himself as a wartime president. Boris Johnson said we must act like any wartime government and do whatever it takes. In Brazil, we had Jair Bolsonaro. He said that Brazil is at war and must combat an invisible enemy. In France, Emmanuel Macron said that he also said that France is at war with an invisible, elusive enemy. And finally, Modi in India asked the people of India to be good soldiers in the war against coronavirus. Now, there's not a lot of politics which combines all these people. There is some populism popping up there in that list, but you might notice that they're all men, and you see a much greater reluctance among women leaders to use that same war metaphor. And we'll have a look at that in a moment. But first, let's have a look at Donald Trump describing himself as a wartime president, and let's hear what he has to say, and also watch out for the clip right at the end.
Tonight, President Trump casting this crisis as an unprecedented battle.
I view it as in a sense, a wartime president. I mean, that's what we're fighting. I mean, it's a very tough situation. It's the invisible enemy. That's always the toughest enemy, the invisible enemy. But we're going to defeat the invisible enemy.
And more details about one of the ways he wants to fight it, those checks to most Americans. The administration calling for 2 rounds of payments, the first to start going out April 6th, the second 6 weeks later. Congress is still negotiating, but it remains unclear how big the checks would be and who gets them. President Trump also pushing back on his Treasury Secretary's private warning to lawmakers that if the federal government does not act, unemployment could skyrocket to 20%.
I don't agree. That's an absolute total worst case scenario. But no, we don't look at that at all.
Meanwhile, tonight, he's brushing off frustrations about how some of the rich and famous are getting tests before others.
How are non-symptomatic professional athletes getting tests while others are waiting in line and can't get them? Do the well-connected go to the front of the line?
Well, you'd have to ask them that question. I mean, I've read. No, I wouldn't say so, but perhaps that's been the story of life.
Tonight, the president is also defending calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus, despite fierce criticism that the term is racist and stigmatizes Chinese Americans. His own CDC director saying it's inappropriate. President Trump tonight insisting it is not racist, but accurate, he says, because the virus started in China.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Clicking on that button down.
Not just content with the wartime presidency thing, but doubling down with the rhetoric there on calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus. Not an accidental slip of the tongue, framed for very clear global political reasons. Like any minute and a half of Donald Trump, there's a lot to unpackage there, but let's stick to that war metaphor. You know, what are the strengths of talking about war in this context? Well, for one thing, it puts people on full alert, and that, you know, is a good thing in a global pandemic for sure. They're more likely to behave in certain ways if people think that their safety and national interest are at threat, and that's what war conjures. It encourages solidarity. But what else does it do? You know, it creates an us and them divide between people and government. It stops people questioning the government decisions and actions, and you saw in that clip some of the decisions and actions facing the US presidency. But with the idea of a country being at war, it adds to the idea that the government have just got to get on with it and people have just got to show their support. It's a very sort of a wartime spirit of thinking you've got to get behind your generals. And we saw that with huge approval ratings had surges at the start of the pandemic, certainly here in the UK, but actually all around the world for sitting governments. It's also, I would say, a very limiting.
Could you try again?
Siri's trying to get involved. Apologise for that. Trying to get involved. I would say it's a very limiting and flawed way of approaching the public health emergency. Certainly, if you look at the UK, invoking the Blitz spirit was tapping into a mythologized and misunderstood psychological response to what happened in the Second World War. And for many people in this country, you know, in February and March, talking about the Blitz spirit just gave them license to go to the pub. You know, they failed to understand that in these circumstances, they themselves were the cluster of bombs that they thought they were braving. So it's a metaphor that comes with a lot of troubling aspects, and certainly you hear and see a lot of health professionals very, very nervous about seeing leaders using war metaphors when they're talking about a public health emergency. So you need to think really carefully about the metaphor you choose. So are there alternatives? There definitely are. Some European leaders have been speaking about a journey, an unknown journey, a difficult journey. And that makes sense too. And you know, not all countries and leaders have felt that they need to use the war metaphor. Others have looked to different elements of their national story that make sense to them. So in New Zealand, if we just move on to the next slide.
Here.
So New Zealand is a sports-mad country, and the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern invoked the idea of a team of 5 million. Approach to responding to coronavirus. That, I think, is a much more helpful way to encourage solidarity amongst the nation. It involves a more troubling aspect of war metaphors, but it also gets everybody pulling together in the same direction. Everybody has a role to play. Everybody is an equal player on that team. So think very carefully about the metaphor that is appropriate to your situation. Does it have different connotations for different people? The other thing to think about is framing, and metaphors certainly help you do that. And if we look at another example of a country that's viewed to have done very well during the pandemic, Taiwan, they focused on a much more positive element again of their national story. The President Tsai Ing-wen focused on civic duty among the population. And when she was recently re-elected, just weeks after the worst of the coronavirus pandemic in the country, she said, Taiwan must help ourselves to help others. And when we help ourselves, others will help us. So their response to COVID was very much seen as part of a civic duty that would also help establish Taiwan more firmly on the global stage. So by doing the right things, following government advice, you're doing two positive things for the price of one. You are helping domestically, you're doing your civic duty, but you're also helping Taiwan win friends on the international stage, which is obviously a big part of their international agenda. So metaphor and framing, really important elements of any speech in a crisis. Now, making things memorable. If I can give you one quick tip that you can take away from today, and remember that one thing that people need to take away. Well, it's not one thing, it's three things. It's about the power of three. We think in threes. We recognise patterns of three, we respond to threes. If you think about things that you see in everyday life or hear in everyday life all the time, they come in threes. Ready, steady, go. Think about history, friends, Romans, countrymen. Three little words, get Brexit done. Now, how many people walk into the bar at the start of any good joke? It's never two, it's never four, it's always three. And here's another one. What did Churchill offer to the people of Britain during his famous Commons speech in 1940? Blood, sweat and tears. Only he didn't say that. What he actually said was, I would say to the House, as I said to those who joined this government, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears and sweat. But public memory has kind of erased toil because it doesn't scan as well. And so in our collective minds, we've done the editing that Churchill would normally have done for himself, and in fact did do when he published the book of speeches a year after. He narrowed it down to blood, sweat and tears. That three works so much better. And even when there's only one thing, there are still three things. It's never just the truth. It's always the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And remember New Labour's top three priorities: education, education, education. So where else can we see the rule of three at work? Think about it in the public health messaging that we've seen in the last few months. Stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. If anything, the people who are analysing that message is saying it worked too well, and it's been difficult to get people back to any form of normality. So threes work, and they're especially important again at times of crisis, when making something memorable can be the difference between life and death. We've already seen a couple of examples of rules of three in people's speeches at the end of the Queen's speech there. And if you look through Barack Obama's speech overnight, you'll see the rule of three being employed there. Lists of three, three commands, three thoughts, three descriptions. It makes the text stand out. It makes it memorable. Three is pleasing to the mind's eye. It just works. So always look to include those in the important parts of the speech. Don't go for big lists. Go for threes. Okay, so what does it all look like when we bring it together? Governor Cuomo, I think, has been one of the standout communicators of the pandemic. He's held daily press conferences throughout the pandemic. This clip we'll see shortly is actually from his last one. And I think the strength of his communication through the pandemic is shown out in his approval ratings, which are still monumentally high, despite the fact that New York, in terms of organisation and its approach in the early days of the pandemic, came in for fierce criticism. And I really do believe that that is down to the straightforward honesty and of his communication style throughout. He's been more combative, but he's done the same things that the leaders of New Zealand and Taiwan have done, and he's made the response to the pandemic part of the New York story. So he hasn't, in the same way that Ardennes has made their response part of the New Zealand story, this is the New York story, and appealing to what New Yorkers like about themselves. He's described it as New York tough, and there's been a lot of ads, posters, and rhetoric around this idea of being New York tough and how they faced up to the pandemic. And a lot of New Yorkers told me it absolutely chimed with them and worked very well indeed. So if we listen towards the end of this presentation and look out for some of the techniques that we've discussed so far this morning.
When this started, we had more cases per. We did act as one. It was extraordinary. I've never seen or felt anything like it. I ask myself, and today I ask you, why did it take a crisis to bring us together? Why does government usually appeal to the worst in us rather than the best? Why do our politics today play to our fears and weaknesses rather than appeal to our strengths? Why doesn't government challenge us to reach higher and speak to our better angels? Why can't it motivate us by love rather than hate? Why doesn't government urge us to realize we are members of the same community, the same family, and that we all benefit when we work together? Isn't that what we really showed over the past 111 days? That working together works. That the only way forward is if I protect you and you protect me. I wear a mask for you and you wear a mask for me. If you care for me and I care for you. We showed that in the end, love does win. Love does conquer all. That no matter how dark the day, love brings the light. That is what I will take from the past 111 days. It inspires me and energizes me and excites me. If we could accomplish together what we did here, this impossible task of beating back this deadly virus, then there is nothing that we can't do.
Okay, we'll pause it there. So in probably, what was that, about 1 minute 30 seconds worth of address. Okay, we've got pretty much a full house in terms of techniques. Okay, that lyrical style, that flow, is not happening by accident. It's happening because of the way it's written. So the rhetorical questions, the why at the start. You've got the contrast between love and hate. You've got the rule of three used more than once. You've got I protect you, you protect me. I wear a mask for you, you wear a mask for me. I care for you, you care for me, and those lovely balanced sentences as well. You've got alliteration and contrast. No matter how dark the day, love brings the light. The rule of 3 at the end. This inspires me, energizes me, excites me. And then crucially right at the end as well, hope for the future. The fact that the lessons learned throughout the pandemic will bring a better future. So, that is, a 1 minute, 30-second script, and you've pretty much seen in just that the learning of the last half an hour that we just talked about. It's got everything in there really, and it's not happening by accident. That's the way it's written. It's written to be memorable. Okay, so if we just go on to the final slide, then they may forget what you said, and people forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that's a wonderful quote and our final reminder this morning, that you're not writing an essay, you're not writing a book, you're not writing an opinion piece in a newspaper, you're writing a speech to be performed out loud. So there is no point building a logical case that is easily forgotten. You've got to make it memorable. And that's even more important in a crisis. And you've got to move people to action. And you move people to action by getting that content right that we started with, about the credibility, the reassurance, the inspiration, the information, and you make it stick, you make it memorable by using some of those techniques that we talked about. Use rule of 3, use repetition, pick the right metaphor, and you'll make sure that your message gets carried. And just if you want a really disheartening last image, if Crick could just click on one more time. If you want to think about what people take away from a single speech, here's a review of how many, 6, 7 speeches that were given in the European Parliament a couple of years back, which boiled down to 1 emoji per speech. Now, going back to all those bits of paper flying around at the start and thinking about the one thing that you want people to take away from each speech. The amount of space, headspace people have to take away messages from speeches, it is pretty limited. That is why, in the bastion of great speeches, we probably only remember 10, 15, 20. Generally, if they take away one emotion, as depicted here by the emojis, then you're doing pretty well in people's busy days. So you need to think carefully about that one thing, whether it's a smiley face or love heart eyes that you want them to take away from it. So start with that and work through the techniques that we've talked about today, and hopefully you'll end up with a memorable script, even at a time of crisis. Okay, well, I hope that's been a useful canter. I think we've got time for a few questions at the end.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Matt. That was absolutely fantastic. And I hope that our participants that have logged in and taken part in the session this morning has been able to benefit and take something away from what Matt has delivered. And again, you can actually, get in touch with us if you want to find out more about the full day courses that Matt does deliver. But I do have some questions for you, Matt. We've still got a little bit of time left. So just in your opinion, what would you say is the most memorable speech that sticks out for you? Perhaps something that you personally resonate with, or something that's really stuck with you?
It's difficult to give an original answer to this, I think, because
I'd want to start with.
Yeah, because we start, because as I said at the end there, the speeches that really sort of ring through the ages, there aren't that many of them, but the one for me, the one that inspired me, as a teenager, from the moment I first heard it replayed, was the Martin Luther King speech. And I don't think if you watch that and listen to it, that anybody would ever tire of listening to that. Many times. And the fascinating story behind the speech as well. It's a speech of 2 halves, and we cover this in the full day course. And the first half of the speech was a very carefully scripted speech that was written for him by his speechwriter, and that relied on one big metaphor, the idea of a bad check, that African Americans had been given a bad check and they had come to Washington to claim their right as citizens. And that's the part of the speech that people sort of forget, even though it's beautifully crafted, because what happens next, the I have a dream section of the speech, is actually ad-libbed. That is part of the speech that he would give on the stump in the South. And they thought, going to Washington, his team, that people had used that so much and heard it so much that actually they needed this different, tightly scripted speech to make an impact. But yeah, ended up ad-libbing that bit. Now, just before he starts that, his speechwriter apparently turned to the person stood next to him, saw Martin Luther King Jr. put his script down to one side and look up to the crowd, and he turned to his companion and said, "We're about to go to church." And that, you know, that's what happened next. You know, he went into full preacher mode, and it was yeah, I don't think it's ever been surpassed in anything that I've seen or heard since.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so next question, what do we have here? What's more important, a good speech or a good speaker?
Well, that's, yeah, that you can only work with the speaker you've got. So you've almost got to, you've almost, you know, for the speechwriting course, you've almost got to move past that and think about what is authentic about the speaker that you have that you can use. You know, not everybody is, you know, a Barack Obama, a Martin Luther King, or even, you know, a Boris Johnson. You know, those sorts of exciting speakers. You know, particularly, you know, a lot of people find it very difficult. You know, if you look at surveys, the things that people terrify people the most, public speaking is often quite high up the list. And so our job as speechwriters is to work with our speaker and our principal about putting them at ease and using language, content, and ideas that they feel comfortable delivering. Because there's nothing worse than I think that would be the biggest lesson, is having a mismatch between the speaker and the content. You know, if they're not comfortable with the content that they're delivering, then you know, they could be the greatest speaker in the world and it would fall absolutely flat. And the example that I would give on that, you know, even before she uttered a word, was the Theresa May Dancing Queen entrance to the Tory Party conference a few years back, where
one of my favourites.
I know. I mean, it was just so horribly awkward, and it was. I don't think it would have worked anyway, but it certainly didn't work because she didn't buy into it, and you could see etched all over her face that she was hating every second of it. And so, you know, even without speaking, she'd sort of lost. And I was saying, you've got to make sure that the speaker is comfortable with the content. So it's sorry, in classic political style, I sort of fudged that question, but I hope it's useful anyway.
No, that's great. No, thank you. So Matt, how long would you normally spend writing a speech? And if you've got an example, what was the most difficult speech that you've had to write?
There's no one answer to this, which makes it very difficult for speechwriters to earn a living, really, because if it's a technical speech about, you know, new developments in healthcare or something, you've got to do a huge amount of research to make sure, you know, to a conference full of people, full of doctors and professors. You know, you've absolutely got to know your stuff, and that's going to require a huge amount of research and time. How you can cut that down is to follow that tip that I mentioned during the presentation, which is build up a war chest of one-liners, anecdotes, quotes that you find interesting and amusing. You know, if you've seen a speaker more than 3 or 4 times, you will start to see that they have crutches through their speeches, jokes and anecdotes that they feel comfortable with. It's because if you're given a 15-20 minute speech, you can be forgiven for using a bit of repetition here and there. So you can certainly cut down on the time it takes by doing that. So you know, there isn't an average. It really depends on the assignment. You know, I could turn out a political tub thumper in, you know, a very short amount of time because I've done that so many times for so many politicians. I probably shouldn't tell them that it doesn't take me very much time. Actually, I'll have to.
No.
My billing rates have just gone down, but it's what you're used to drafting. And in terms of the speeches I used to find difficult, I think. I used to find it difficult writing speeches that had to be delivered in schools, because you've got to, and that's really where the authenticity thing is. You've got to judge it just right, because you have to respect the audience in front of you. But you know, I've seen speeches given to first ministers to deliver in front of 7 or 8 year olds, which talk about the importance of STEM and, you know, university breakthroughs, this, that, and the other, which are just totally inappropriate for the audience that have been written to. But preparing remarks that are suitable for a certain age grade without seeming like you're patronising them, It's very difficult to walk that line, I thought, and you do rely a huge amount on the authenticity of the speaker to get that right. But I always found them very tricky to pitch right.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. And just one final question. Is there a difference between writing a speech in the real world versus writing a speech for the virtual world, i.e., Zoom, webinars, and things like that?
Yeah, I think this is a very live debate at the moment, and I don't know if you've been watching the Democrats' convention that they're doing virtually at the moment. It's been absolutely fascinating watching how people are trying to tackle this, and I don't think people have settled on a perfect answer to this yet. Certainly, from what I've seen so far, and I wrote a short blog about this, which I can put up on Twitter after this if people are interested in reading it, just on my thoughts from the first night from the convention. For me, I think if you're doing video, you've got to keep it shorter, to be honest. I think, without the audience interaction of the claps and the cheers and the laughs, it's very difficult to hold on to people's attention without that sort of excitement building in a room. So, a convention speech could, typically go on for almost an hour. They're generally down to about 5 minutes here. The exceptions so far have been Michelle Obama and Barack Obama last night. Michelle Obama's, I thought, was interesting in that her tone, I felt, was much more suited to a person's living room, and she seemed very, and I think that's probably about right in terms of a different form of writing for the online world, for writing for Zoom or what have you. Barack Obama's speech was very different. I mean, that was presidential. It was given with the inscription about the Constitution to the side of him, and it was much more presidential. I think both worked to a different degree. I think 20 minutes that they both did was the absolute outer limit of probably where you can keep people, not political geeks like me, but normal people keep their attention for more than 20 minutes if it's just a speech on camera. I think you're stretching it there. I would like to see a bit more use of visuals and film overplayed people talking, make it look more like a party political broadcast. I would, frankly. I think that would probably work better, and maybe that's where we'll get to as time goes on. But people are still experimenting at the moment, and I'd be really interested to hear what other people's thoughts are.
Yeah, and we're very much still in the premature stages of this new normal, if you think about it. I mean, I feel like a lot of people now will obviously continue using these virtual platforms and so on. So I guess it's just kind of like a learning curve and something that, in time will enhance and get better. So
absolutely. What I would say is the writing process remains absolutely critical, and you should probably come to the college to learn about it. Yes, absolutely. Come to our college and learn more about it. But no, that's it. I'm not going to put you on the spot anymore. Thank you so much for answering those questions, Matt. And again, to our participants, if you do have any further questions for myself or Matt, if you want to find out more, please do get in touch. If you can just go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Right. So if you want to find out more about our webinars that we do deliver each Thursday, please do sign up to our training alerts if you go on to www.civilservicecollege.org.uk. There is a section on there that is dedicated to all of our webinars. You can sign up on there and find out what's coming up, or you can actually access our previous webinars. This recording will be posted in the next day or two. And we'll just go on to the next slide. Thank you very much. And in order to stay connected, these are our social media handles. We are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and again, our YouTube channel. We've got a YouTube channel as well, and this video will be recorded and put on there, again, probably by the end of today, so you can forward that on to your contacts and colleagues. Thank you so much, Matt. That was absolutely fantastic. And again, for our participants, thank you for tuning in. And if you do want to find out more or ask any more questions in relation to what's been delivered this morning, please do get in touch with myself or Matt, and we'll happily assist you. Thank you so much, Matt. And yeah, we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye all. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you.